Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for inviting me again to speak here at Westside. Thanks to Linda for extending me the invitation. Today I'm here sort of building a bit on the presentation that I gave last time, which was called The Blessed Peacekeepers. So at that time I challenged everyone to wipe away the lines in the sand, dividing one group from another, and reach a hand out in friendship and brotherhood and sisterhood. Today I'm going to expand on that a bit, but taking it in a different direction. Today I'd like to ask you to take a bit of a walk with me. We'll start in the dusty hills of Judah with the prophet Isaiah, and we'll go to the shores of the Delaware River with William Penn, and we'll end up right back here in America, 2015. So the concept of the peaceable kingdom, as I read earlier, comes to us from the prophet Isaiah. In the 11th chapter, he imagines this world that exists at some point in the future, where our expectations about the way that the world works will be set on their heads, basically. You have wolves lying down with lambs. You have lions and bears eating straw. And what this is really getting at in his mind is sort of a return to the Garden of Eden. Right? So the Garden of Eden was one of these prototypical myths of the Hebrew people. As the story goes, before sin came into the world, Yahweh had created all of these creatures as sort of companions for the first man, Adam. And before there was sin in the world, none of these animals killed each other. Right? None of them ate meat. They ate fruit, and so did Adam. He ate only fruit. And it was only after sin happened that Yahweh showed them how to kill and how to sacrifice. And Yahweh said, as you leave this garden, as you worship me, as you demonstrate to me the reverence that I deserve, you shall take these animals and kill them and sacrifice them. And Isaiah is imagining a world in which this doesn't happen anymore. It sounds lovely, doesn't it? Sounds nice. But what is this peaceable kingdom? Is that all that there is to it that Isaiah is imagining? Just a sort of nice, Garden of Eden paradise. Well, Isaiah wrote in a time of great crisis for his people. He was a prophet, one of the greatest prophets, in fact. And the problem that he was facing was twofold, really. It was theological, but it was also political. Right? So the theology that he had grown up in, the theology of the ancient Hebrews, was that they worshipped Yahweh exclusively, or at least as the top among other gods, and that he would protect them. Right? So they had this list of things that they had to do. You go to Exodus 34, and it reads basically like a contract, where Yahweh says to them, look, you do X, Y, and Z, and I will do A, B, and C. I will take care of you. But the political reality showed something very different. The political reality showed that they had not been taken care of very well. The political reality showed that all these other forces in the area, all these other empires, were having their way with Israel. And Isaiah doesn't quite know what to make of this. He comes up with all these prophecies, and the prophecies aren't really predictions per se. They're sort of like looking at the way the world is now and concluding what this means for the people that are listening to you. He was kind of like a 7th century Rush Limbaugh in that sense, right? So he's just he has a loud voice, and he's telling people all the things that they're doing wrong, and this is what they need to do, or else, basically. And what Isaiah is really frustrated with is all this stuff, all these religious displays and these festivals and the sacrifices that they've been doing for however many years, centuries, and it doesn't seem to mean anything. All these grand displays, the big temples that have been built, and he imagines that Yahweh is actually upset with this. So he sort of ignores the fact that Yahweh commanded all this, and he imagines Yahweh sort of changes his mind, and Yahweh says, your festivals, your assemblies, your sacrifices, these mean nothing to me. He has Yahweh saying, I loathe your new moon festivals. They have been a burden to me, and I can tolerate them no longer. And now, because of this, when you hold out your hands in prayer, I will turn away my eyes. Though you offer countless prayers, I shall not listen, because there is blood on your hands. Now in this, he turns it a bit, right? So he's been talking about these sacrifices that the Israelites had been making. But he turns it a bit and he says, no, it's not just the blood of the sacrifices on your hands. It's the blood of injustice on your hands. That is why Yahweh has not been protecting us, because we've been allowing injustice to happen in our midst. Yahweh says, wash and be clean. Put away your evil deeds far from my sight. Cease to do evil. Learn to do good. Pursue justice. Guide the oppressed. Uphold the rights of the fatherless. And plead the widow's cause. Isaiah becomes a social justice activist. And he tells the ancient Hebrews in Judah, where he worked and prophesied. He tells them that this is the reason why Yahweh is upset with them. This is why the peaceable kingdom has not come yet. But he prophesies that it will. But first he says there's going to be a lot of death and a lot of destruction. Right? So the peaceable kingdom that Isaiah imagines is not just some nice thing that sort of floats down out of the clouds that we all kumbaya into. Right? It is basically what is left over after the entirety of the known world goes into a cage match and one person is left over. And he predicts that will be Judah. That Yahweh will protect Judah and set it up again after all these battles, and that it will be a king among nations, that all the nations will look to it. It will be considered as just like Assyria and just like Egypt. So the peaceable kingdom of Isaiah is peace through war, is peace through the shedding of blood, it's peace through the destruction of one's enemies. That's the peaceable kingdom that Isaiah imagines. Now, the Assyrian army, as shown here, did eventually show that he was right about a few things. King Hezekiah took the throne at the end of the 7th century. He made a political decision. He decided that he would throw in his lot with the Pharaoh in Egypt. Now this is it's kind of fascinating, right? So you have the ancient Israelites, right? They're supposed to have come out of Egypt and rejected that. But here he's making political alliances with the Egyptians. So he makes this political alliance with the Pharaoh, and he says, you're going to protect me, right? Aren't you? Yeah. And he says, all right, now I'm good with Egypt, so I'm going to stop paying tribute to the Assyrians. Shown here. And the Assyrians didn't like that at all. And the Assyrian king Sennacherib came in and laid siege to Jerusalem and took away the treasures of the temple. Now why, you might ask, why is all this attention being paid to Jerusalem? Who cares, right? And in the grand scheme of things, Jerusalem was a backwater. It was a tiny little podunk one-horse town. It was Tyler, Texas, right? Nobody really cares about it unless you live there, right? Sorry for anybody from Tyler. I've been there. But this is why. So Jerusalem, as it happened, was a podunk, but it was right smack in the middle of the three major powers at the time. It had a geographical advantage, being as it was right in this little area where the Egyptians, if the Egyptians wanted to deal with the Assyrians or the Babylonians or anybody else wanted to come at each other, this is all desert. Nobody's walking through this. They're all coming straight through Jerusalem. That's why everybody cared. And so the only thing the kings could do in Israel and Judah was to make whatever alliances they basically could. They didn't have the option to be independent. And so they were making alliances with Egypt, and they were trying for that to work. But a century later, a century after Isaiah, the tide had turned. The situation was different. Assyria was now on the decline. It had been ascending, now it was on the decline, and the Babylonians were coming up into power. And so now the Egyptian army decided they were going to ally with the Assyrians to try to fight off the Babylonians if they could. And they plowed right through Judah on their way. And now there was a different king in Judah. His name was Josiah. He decided to take another political chance. Right? So the previous king had decided to ally with the Egyptians. Josiah said, no, I'm going to trust in Yahweh, and I'm going to go fight the Egyptians. And he was killed. in battle. And Judah became a vassal state of Egypt once again. Judah finally fell, not permanently, but emphatically, in the 5th century, 100 years later. Egypt was now on the decline, and the king of Judah formed an alliance with the Babylonians, right? All these power plays going back and forth, all this political maneuvering. So he formed an alliance with the Babylonians, trusting, for them to help. But then he sort of changed his mind. He said, you know what, maybe I can go it alone. And the Babylonians were not interested in that. They came in and sacked Jerusalem, they didn't kill the king, they put out his eyes, and they killed all of his sons. They dragged him away to Babylon. Now, what's interesting, again, is the theological ramifications, right? So what Isaiah was trying to get across was we need to get back in Yahweh's good graces. We need to do what's right by him. And these two kings, King Hezekiah and King Josiah, both did that. According to the scriptures, they did what was pleasing to Yahweh. And yet, they made boneheaded political decisions. And their kingdoms paid the price for that. So the theology was contradicted at every turn in Israel. The theology taught that you should only worship Yahweh, that if you focus just on Yahweh, then he would protect you. And he would send a Messiah and bring about this peaceable kingdom. And that's what everyone was counting on in the 1st century when Jerusalem was destroyed again by the Romans. I was just in Rome a few weeks ago. This is the Arch of Titus in Rome. That shows the sack of Jerusalem and the carrying away of all the implements of the temple. So Yahweh had kept part of the promise, right? So he had promised to bring death and destruction to the area. He had promised to bring Judah's enemies to it, to reprimand it. But he had forgotten to give them the Messiah. And so the peaceful kingdom that was imagined by Isaiah turned out to be nothing more than a false dream that slumbered for millennia before we rejoin it with the story of William Penn. Now, William Penn was raised a Christian. He was the son of a British aristocrat. His father was an admiral in the Royal Navy. He was a child of tremendous privilege. He could basically do whatever he wanted with his life. He had so much money. He just went to Oxford sort of on a whim. He thought about becoming a doctor for a while and enrolled in some medical classes. Decided it wasn't quite for him. Kind of partied around England for a while. Eventually his father said, well, you need to take an interest in my affairs. Sent him to Ireland because his father had a lot of land there. So he went over to Ireland as a young man to look over his father's estates. While he was there, he helped some of the other English aristocrats put down some Irish rebellion. And he was pretty proud of himself and had this portrait commissioned of him in full military regalia. He thought that he looked really good in a suit of armor. He wanted everybody to know it. But then something happened. He happened to meet a guy by the name of George Fox. Now, George Fox was much less privileged than William Penn. He was the son of a weaver. But he took advantage of this environment that had been created during all this political turmoil in England at the time, right? So you had the church, the Catholic Church on its way out, and then the Church of England being established, and then swapping and switching, and all these things happening. Then Cromwell took over, then it was a Puritan country for a while. So it was very chaotic religiously. And as this was happening, there were a lot of people that got really frustrated with all this stupidity, right? And much like Isaiah, George Fox looked around at all the religious pageantry, all these big churches that had been built, all these ecclesiastical structures and the hierarchies, and he said, this isn't right. This can't be how God wants it to be, right? And, I think there are a few people maybe looking at the situation today, right? We might look around the state of Texas and say, is there any religious pageantry on display? Are there big buildings that are being built? to the service of maybe individual people's personalities rather than the service of God. So this is a perennial problem. And George Fox saw this problem, and he said, it would be so much easier if Jesus just told us directly what we should be doing. Right? Why do we have to go through a pope? Why do we have to go through the King of England? Why can't Jesus just tell us directly, right? So that's what his disciples did. His disciples just sort of hung around, and Jesus told them what to do. So why can't we be like that? And then as it happened, he had a revelation from Jesus Christ who said, you're absolutely right. I'm going to tell you what to do. At least that's what he told people. Right? So he told people that, no, I can get revelations directly from Jesus, and not just me, but we all can. And that sort of became the essence of what became known as the Quaker religion. And so George Fox was the founder of the Quakers. And this seems like a relatively benign version of Christianity. It certainly does to me. But the problem was that if you take your orders directly from Jesus himself, then you're not going through the earthly powers that be, and you're not paying enough respect to the King of England, who was the head of the church at the time. And that is a problem. Again, theology and politics are coming into play here, and they're at odds with each other. All right, so George Fox and his Quaker followers were thrown into prison, thrown into jail. They were terribly persecuted. The king, the establishment church did not want them active, but they kept on being active because it was a very attractive idea. Like, what if we could just get rid of the Pope, get rid of the Vatican, just do this ourselves? Isn't that nice? Yeah, a lot of people thought so. A lot of people still think so. Now, as long as it was just George Fox and a bunch of other nobodies, it wasn't that big of a problem. But William Penn met George Fox in Ireland and listened to what he had to say. And he liked it. And he bought in, lock, stock, and barrel. And in fact, he was best friends with George Fox, followed him around wherever he went, wrote about George Fox's ideas. In fact, probably did more than George Fox even to popularize Quakerism. And so the king now has an issue because the son of one of his biggest supporters, and the fellow that he owes almost everything to, William Penn's father, has now thrown in his lot with this George Fox guy. So it's not that easy to throw somebody like that into prison. It's not that easy to throw someone who's wealthy and whose father's very powerful and politically connected into prison. So the king had a problem. And William Penn proposed a solution. He said, look, I know you have this tremendous debt to me because of my father and you don't like my religion. How about this? How about if you let me go to America and bring all the Quakers in England with me? Then we're out of your hair. You don't have to deal with us. We can, start a colony. That'll be good for you. It's a political, almost a business arrangement. And the king said yes. He said yes, and in one fell swoop, he made William Penn the single wealthiest landowner who was not a member of any royal family in the world. At that time, with the grant that was given to William Penn, he owned over 45,000 square miles. Can you imagine that, owning an entire state, basically? I can't even imagine it. But he owned basically everything west of New Jersey and north of Maryland. Maryland, of course, belonging to Lord Baltimore. And he was given, according to the king, he was given sovereign rule of the territory with all the rights and privileges, except to declare war. He could not do that by himself. But he was the dictator of this huge tract of land that nobody lived on, right? Nobody lived there yet, except for these people, right? So it's kind of a difficult situation, right? So here's all this land that you have that's just given to you. And oh yeah, there's all these people living there and you're going to have to figure out something to do. Now, to his credit, and also to the credit of his religious beliefs, right? So the Quakers were very pacifistic, and they were very liberal for their time, even still are very liberal. And Penn, they're not even allowed to take oaths, right? So somehow he's got to go over there and negotiate with these people without taking oaths. But he did so. He did so, and to his credit, the historical record shows that Penn was actually a really great person at working with and negotiating with the native tribes there, primarily the Lenape tribes. And this painting shows Penn creating the Grand Treaty in 1682 with the Lenape people exchanging some goods, and the Lenape agreed to let them sort of create a colony there. The problem, though, is that this is as much of a fiction, as much of an imaginative creation as Isaiah's peaceable kingdom. This, what you see here, never happened. At least not according to the historical record. There were, to be sure, lots of different treaties and negotiations between Penn and Lenape, but this event never really happened. This painting was painted 50 years after Penn's death. It was commissioned by Penn's son, John Penn. And what he wanted to do was to show how the colony had been founded and how peaceful and how nice and pleasant, and it was just a nice little business transaction. Right? The Quakers are really good at business transactions, actually. There are a number of Quaker-owned businesses. Barclays, Lloyd's of London, those are all Quaker-owned businesses. Cadbury, all Quaker businesses. They're very good at that. And so John Penn wanted to show people how much of a peaceful, nice, calm business transaction this was. But this never happened. He commissioned this painting by a fellow named Benjamin West. He painted this in 1771. And he just sort of imagined this scene. He looked at some artifacts that were left over from the Lenape tribe and just sort of imagined what it would have looked like. So it was manufactured. And why was John interested in sort of manufacturing this scene, this peaceful scene? Well, after Penn's death, it turns out, the negotiations with the natives didn't go quite so nicely. There kept on being more and more British colonists coming over. And in fact, ironically, it's because Penn was such a good guy with the Lenape tribe, he was so good at getting them to agree, that the colony of Pennsylvania was really successful, and people kept wanting to move there, and there kept on being more white people. And not much room for the brown and red people. And so his son, John, historians believe he actually was the architect of this arrangement. It's called the walking purchase. I don't know if anybody's from Pennsylvania has heard about this. It's the walking purchase. The idea was that the Pennsylvanian settlers went to the Lenape and said, look, we need a little bit more land. How about if you grant us the amount that a man can walk in a day and a half through the woods? Basically, we'll draw a straight line, and then everything to the right of that we'll take. And the Lenape said, well, okay. I mean, how far can they go? It's through the woods. It hasn't been cleared yet. How far could a guy go? And they were thinking that they might get to about there. But instead, what they did is they cleared a path through the woods, and they chose their 3 fastest walkers, like champion walkers, basically. And they sent them to walk a day and a half straight. And they made it, instead of here, they made it all the way to here. And they claimed everything on a perpendicular from this. So instead of getting this little narrow strip here, they got all of this, basically all of eastern Pennsylvania, in one fell swoop. And the Lenape felt cheated. And that's because they were. And they fought it at the time, but again, they kept on giving in and compromising and compromising. And they ended up losing power. And then the colonial government said, this, technically they did walk that in a day and a half, so you're going to have to give that up. And this ended up being just the first in a number of movements where the Lenape kept on being pushed further to the west in 1724, and then to the south they were pushed across Ohio, across Indiana, and eventually down into Oklahoma, where there are a number of Lenape today. So that was the peaceful kingdom that William Penn put into motion. Peaceful, perhaps, for the Pennsylvanians, not so peaceful for the Lenape. What happened next is kind of interesting, though. This fellow, his name is Edward Hicks, also a Quaker. He started off as a Quaker minister, had a side business as a painter. He painted primarily houses and barns and things like that, but he really loved painting scenes. And he would kind of choose these different scenes and kind of obsess over them and paint all these different versions of them. And there's one scene in particular that he really loved, and that's this one. And this is called the Peaceable Kingdom. And it's kind of a famous painting, a famous American painting. You've probably seen at least, if not this version, one of the other versions that are out there. Growing up in my house, my parents had a print of this painting. So every day I would see this and I would look at it from time to time. And what's interesting is he takes the old painting of Penn and conducting the treaty, and he sort of puts that in the background. And in the foreground, he paints all of the animals from the Isaiah passage, chapter 11. He paints the wolf lying down with the lamb. He paints the lion with the ox. He paints the bear eating straw. He paints the children leading this congregation. And so just like with Isaiah, he is trying to portray this future, this paradise that exists. He's taking the imagery that the prophet Isaiah used, and he's saying, this is what we have now. This is what we've created now in Pennsylvania. Right? He's painting these paintings in the early 19th century, and he's saying, this is what we have. This is what Penn did. Penn brought this to fruition. Penn created the peaceful kingdom in America. But did he? Was there a peaceable kingdom in America? Another painting by Edward Hicks of Washington crossing the Delaware. The country of America was born out of war. Our founding itself was not peaceable. It was always looking forward to peace, always hoping for peace. Right? We planned for peace. We talked great things about peace. We wrote the Declaration of Independence, another painting by Edward Hicks. The signing of the Declaration of Independence. And in that document it says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. All men are created equal. All men except for these men. This is a painting that Edward Hicks never painted. Never painted slavery. He lived in the North. He didn't get to see much of it, but he lived in an America that contained slavery. And he painted the signing of the Declaration of Independence, knowing that somewhere in his country there were slaves that were being denied life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The failure of that declaration, and indeed the original sin of our American government, maybe not the first sin that it was ever committed in this hemisphere, but the original sin of the government was its reluctance to extend the equality it so loudly and forcefully championed to all the people living within its boundaries. And so, for want of 2/5 of a person, for the cost of 2/5 of our founding fathers' integrity, our peaceable kingdom was plunged into war. The northern colonies were founded with high sort of ideology, but the South was founded out of economic necessity. Right? All the southern colonies were economic enterprises. The purpose of those colonies was to make money. The only way to make money at that time in the amount that they needed was to have slavery. So when these men rode into battle, they were battling for slavery. Make no mistake about it. They were fighting for slavery. They were fighting for the right to have slaves. They're very explicit at that. And this flag, this battle flag, flew next to the Lone Star of Texas. Our own state was not exempt from that sin. Now, there's a lot being made in the news recently about this flag, about this battle flag that broke the peace that had been established, the tentative peace of America. It's interesting. Originally, the Confederates had a different flag. They had something they called the Stars and Bars. It was 2 red stripes, a white stripe in the middle, and a blue field with a ring of stars. It looked a lot like Old Glory of the American Independence War. And that's kind of what they were going for, right? So the the Southerners, when they broke away from the Union, they saw themselves as inheriting the true spirit of the American Revolution. They were the true inheritors of that. And so they wanted something that evoked that. The problem was, though, that on the battlefield, the Confederate flag and the Union flag looked so alike that even the soldiers couldn't tell the difference. And so they needed something different. They needed a battle flag to go against the American flag of the Union. And eventually the Southerners started to dislike the Stars and Bars so much, in part because it did look so much like the Union flag. They said, this should really be our flag. This should be the official flag of the Confederacy. And so it was. It was made the official flag of the Confederacy in 1863, and it remained the official flag until 1865. Now this flag is a little bit different. It's a white field with the Confederate battle flag in the corner. Kind of a simple flag. This ran into some problems later because when the wind wasn't blowing, it kind of looked like a flag of surrender. But the guy who designed this flag, he designed this with a white field. Why? He was actually quite explicit about why. He said, this is the white man's flag. This is the flag of white supremacy. This flag reinforces the idea that white people are better. And because white people are better, we get to have slaves. And that means we get to keep doing what we're doing. This was the flag of white supremacy. So it's not at all a surprise that this flag was taken up by the Ku Klux Klan after the war. It's no surprise that this flag was continued to be used in a way to promote hatred and to promote the idea of white supremacy. Now, people today still fly this flag. And the people that pretend that it's not something that is hateful, they're either ignorant or they're willfully ignorant. Or they're lying. Or they're very troubled, like this guy. Dylan Roof photographed himself holding this flag prominently and was inspired to kill 9 people in Charleston, South Carolina, because of what this flag stood for. He believed in what this flag says. And what motivated him to do this? I mean, when he was younger, according to all reports, he was kind of a troubled kid, had some issues, but he wasn't racist, or he didn't appear to be. What motivated him? All reports say that this is what motivated him. The shooting of Trayvon Martin by George Zimmerman inspired tremendous racism in him, as it has inspired racism in a number of people. And also this, the death of Freddie Gray, the murder of Freddie Gray by policemen. And so when the lives of these young black men can inspire, not sorrow, not grief, but renewed hate. When the hashtag goes up that says, Black Lives Matter, this is why it matters. Now, the flag in Charleston was taken down. This young lady, her name is Bree Newsom, she decided to take it upon herself. She acted and climbed the flag, took it down. And I love this photo. I'd love to say that this is how the story ends. But the story doesn't end there, because a few seconds later she was arrested and taken away. She took down the flag of hate and she was put in chains for it. Now, if that doesn't paint a picture, I don't know what does. So what does this mean for our future? Right? So this is the peaceful kingdom of America today. But what about for the future? Is it possible? Is it actually possible for the wolf to lie down with the lamb? Does that happen in reality? Is that something that can be achieved? Does anybody think that a wolf can lie down with the lamb? Can it? Yes. Yes, it can. It's happening right here. This picture shows a wolf lying down with a lamb. This dog is 99.5% wolf. and is lying down peacefully with the Lamb. This is a wolf that we have made into something else. We have changed it through the power of change. Human change. We can make the wolf lie down with the Lamb. Isaiah was wrong. The peaceable kingdom does not come about by looking ahead to some future Savior and praying that God will eventually intervene on our behalf. And Edward Hicks was wrong. The peaceable kingdom has not already come about. You can't just look back at some past founder and pretend that they're able to transcend their human nature. And even, dare I say, Bree Newsom was wrong. One person acting now in the present is not sufficient to bring about the peaceable kingdom and wipe out centuries of hate and bigotry. The flag is down now. What has changed about us? Has anything changed about us besides the flag just being down? Right? But here's what they were right about. All three of them were right. There is injustice in the world, more than any of us care to admit, and more than any of us are able to address on our own. And so we should, as Hicks did, look to the best examples of our past to inspire us to act. We should, as Isaiah did, continue to champion the cause of justice over empty religious platitudes. And we should, as Bree did, stand up to challenge the examples of injustice in our own lives and in the lives of our fellow human beings. We don't need to wait for someone else to come along to make the wolf lie down with the lamb. If we can realize that we have that power within us, then we will finally find ourselves living in that peaceable kingdom. Thank you.